Yes, thank you. Let me start by addressing a couple of the specific points that Mr. Camps just raised, and then I want to come back to the issue of the 3-vent versus 1-vent. First, Mr. Camps is talking again about the coal fire stations in the area and whether or not those have to be included in a cumulative impacts analysis. I think two things. One is we agree certainly with the NRC staff that any releases from the coal facilities are beyond the NRC's jurisdiction and not something the NRC could issue any relief surrounding. But number two, more fundamentally, if this is now styled as a cumulative effects environmental report, environmental impact statement type issue, I don't think there has been any evidence or technical support presented that would justify a contention that would say that there would be such effects. I think it's entirely conjectural, so it doesn't meet the admissibility criteria. Second, Mr. Camp said they find perplexing the statements about the occupational dose being 50 times, I believe is what he said, that the public dose limits. My response to that is quite simply that the regulations are what they are and they're not subject to challenge in this proceeding. The fact of the matter is occupational doses are subject to different limits than the public doses in the various analysis, and certainly there's no basis to assume that those doses at the regulatory limit will cause any health effects. And to the extent that this would be an argument that those dose limits are inadequate to protect health and safety of workers, that's a challenge to the regulations that's beyond the scope of the proceeding here. I think, and certainly with respect to any health studies by Dr. Mangano or anybody else, those are really the kind of issues that would be more appropriate for a rulemaking petition than they are in a site-specific licensing proceeding. The third thing is, Mr. Camps mentioned, said that we haven't demonstrated construction worker doses and effects, and in fact, we have, and that's addressed in the environmental report. I know we cited the specific section in our papers, but just for completeness, that is addressed in ER section 4.5. The occupational doses of construction workers at Fermi 3 would be completely controlled by operation of Fermi 2 because obviously Fermi 3 wouldn't be operating at that point, and those doses are set out in the ER. Now, with respect to occupational doses at Fermi 3, again, the dose limits are what they are in the regulations. But I should say that not only are workers at the site, if they're working in a radiological controlled area, they do wear dosimetry or TLDs or some form of occupational exposure detection. But more fundamentally, doses are monitored by continuous air monitoring equipment, and so there is a means to detect if there's some release that challenges regulatory standards and could cause an effect. Obviously, that's not going to go undetected. Now, I want to return back to the 3-stack versus 1-stack design change, because I think that really was the initial focus of this contention. And as we tried to explain in our reply, that's a case where the COLA, the COL application, is really tracking a change in the DCD initiated by the vendor. The original, well, not the original, but DCD Rep 4 assumed that the radways building, turbine building, and reactor building HVAC systems all vented to one vent path, and in the modified ESBWR design DCD Rep 5, there will be individual vent locations at each of the radways building, the turbine building, and the reactor building. Presumably that's a change made to simplify the ductwork, but regardless, it is analyzed by the vendor in the context of the DCD change, at least to the point of the source terms in the stack. And then in the COLA, Detroit Edison has done the analysis to address the site-specific dispersion, using site-specific meteorological data, site-specific receptors to do the off-site dose calculations to show that the change doesn't result in any of the effluents exceeding regulatory limits. The board asked a broad question and said be prepared to discuss that analysis, and probably I'm not the right guy to discuss it in detail, but a couple of things to point out about that analysis in the COLA. And again, this was presented as a justification for a departure in the original COLA, but now in COLA Rev 1 that now references DCD Rev 5, it's no longer a departure, it's now conforming to the latest DCD. But be that as it may, the FSAR section 12.2.2.2 presents the off-site dose calculations that we're using the GASPAR, G-A-S-P-A-R, all caps 2 code. And the impacts are presented in FSAR table 12.2-18AR, I believe, where it's a little a, capital R. The source terms were taken from the DCD Rev 5, table 12.2-16, and that also presents details on how those source terms were derived. The atmospheric dispersion factors, or known as the chi over q, and the deposition factors, the delta over q, are site-specific and taken from FSAR section 2.3 of the COLA, and the receptor locations, as I mentioned, are all site-specific. And so again, the results are then presented in FSAR table 12.2-18 little b capital R, and all of the results are within applicable regulatory limits as set forth in 10 CFR Part 50, Appendix I, Section 2, dot capital B, and 2, Roman 2, dot C. So with respect to that particular analysis and the vent design, the three vent versus one vent, what the contention is really presenting is, again, a lot of conjecture, but no specific recognition of the analysis that's presented or any basis to challenge that analysis. And then finally, I'd just like to, again, go back to the issue of the 3 vents versus 1 vent, and Mr. Camps is talking about the possibility of hot spots and subpopulations and things like that. Again, the deposition factors are presented in the table, but perhaps more importantly, the stacks are continuously monitored, and so there is air sampling equipment and other on-site equipment to determine whether or not there's any specific reason for concern. But in reality, these effluents are going to be far below regulatory limits. The last point I'll make is, again, in this contention, there was some discussion in the original contention thrown in about liquid effluents that was reminiscent of some of the analysis we talked about under Contention 5. Contention 7 is not really about liquid effluents. Contention 7 is about the air effluents, and so I think that's a little bit of a confusion thrown in, and that shouldn't be addressed as part of Contention 7. And lastly, I'll just reiterate again, with respect to occupational doses, the petitioners have never stated that they represent any particular workers at the site, and therefore are not, don't have standing or legal authority to represent the interests of workers at the station.
So from your explanation, there is a new analysis with the 3-vent configuration, taking into consideration site-specific environmental conditions and the stack heights. And those results are in the tables you quoted, I guess, 18B-R, 12.218.
Yes.
And those results are significantly below regulatory requirements?
Yes. And yes, significantly. My team is agreeing that significantly is an appropriate adjective.
I probably should have said I was quoting.
When was that part of a revision to the application?
It was included in the original application as part of the departures analysis.
Was that available when the petition was?
Yes, it was.